Welcome to episode 98 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by a 17-laws guy. It's February 6, 1958, and today is not about a goal or a trophy or a tactic. It's about a flight, a refueling stop, a runway covered in winter slush, and the day football lost one of its most brilliant young teams, the Busby Babes. If you listen to episode 75, you'll remember the arc, how Matt Busby didn't just build Manchester United to win England, he built them to win Europe, and how the European Cup, still new, still controversial, became the club's horizon. February 6, 1958 is the day that horizon shattered, and then, over the following decade, was rebuilt into something even bigger. But how did we get here? In the 1950s, Manchester United are not simply good, they are modern. Busby's model is radical. Develop youth, trust youth, play football that looks like the future. United win the league in 1956, and then they win it again in 57. And they don't play like cautious champions. They play like a team that thinks the purpose of football is joy, speed, and risk. And then comes Europe. English football authorities are wary of the European Cup. Travel is complicated. Fixtures pile up. Air travel is still, in a very literal sense, experimental compared to today. But Busby insists, if England wants to matter, it has to compete. So United go into Europe, and Europe falls in love with them. Fast, young, fearless, attacking. A team that doesn't just beat you, it arrives in your city like a marching band. And that matters because in early February 1958, United are live on three fronts. They're chasing the title again. They're still in the FA Cup. And in Europe, they're in the quarterfinal of the European Cup. 2 legs against Crvena Zvezda, Red Star Belgrade. 5 days before the disaster, United play one of the most famous league matches of the era. Arsenal 4, Manchester United 5, at Highbury. 9 goals, a frenzy. The last match this team ever plays on English soil. Then they travel to Belgrade. United bring a lead from the first leg, but the second leg becomes a thriller. United go 3 up. Crvena Zvezda come roaring back, and it ends 3-3. United go through 5-4 on aggregate. They've survived a hostile atmosphere, freezing conditions, and a European tie that feels like a different sport to the domestic game. And after the match, there's a banquet. Opponents and journalists together, sharing the strange camaraderie that existed in that era. Football as an event, not just a result. Then the next day, the journey home. To make the trip easier, and to avoid the exhaustion of commercial travel and complicated scheduling, the club has chartered a British European Airways aircraft. It's an airspeed ambassador, one of the Elizabethan class. And because planes in that era can't reliably make Belgrade to Manchester non-stop, they have to refuel on the way. So they land in West Germany, in Munich-Riem airport. A winter airfield, snow, cold, the kind of grey that makes everything feel slower. The players disembark while the plane refuels. They walk through the terminal, get coffee, browse shops, wait for weather to clear. Some of them are hungover from the night before. Some are restless. Some are thinking ahead, to the weekend, to Wolves, to the title chase. And then they board again. The first takeoff attempt is aborted. Then the second attempt is aborted. Passengers are told it's a technical issue. They get off the plane again, and then, almost immediately, are told to get back on. The third attempt. The mood changes. Card games stop. People become quiet. The plane begins its run. From inside, it feels long, too long. Then comes the detail that explains everything. The aircraft reaches the speed where it can no longer safely abort, then hits a stretch of slush that drags it down. Too fast to stop, too slow to lift. The plane keeps going, breaks through the perimeter fence, strikes a building and a fuel truck, and parts of the aircraft break apart and burn. In a few seconds, a triumphant European return becomes a crash site. And this is where the story becomes unbearable, because football has no language for it. Players wake in the snow, still strapped into their seats, smoke and grit in the air, bodies laid out in a straight line as if the wind itself tried to organize the chaos. And then, heroism. The goalkeeper Harry Gregg, with a fractured skull, pulls people from wreckage, drags teammates away from possible explosion, and uses his tie as a tourniquet. Bill Folks, in stocking feet, moves through the snow looking for who can be carried. Bobby Charlton survives, stunned, bleeding, trying to make sense of the fact that his world has been torn open. Matt Busby is alive, but gravely injured. His lung collapses. He's given the last rites, twice. This is not a metaphor. This is how close he comes to being lost. And then there's Duncan Edwards, the engine of the team. The player many believed could become the greatest England ever produced. He survives the crash, but the injuries are catastrophic, and 15 days later, on February 21st, he passes away in hospital. So who did we lose? 8 Manchester United players: Geoff Bent, Roger Byrne, Eddie Coleman, Mark Jones, David Pegg, Tommy Taylor, Billy Whelan, and then later Duncan Edwards. 3 key staff: club secretary Walter Crickmer, trainer Tom Curry, and coach Bert Wally. 8 journalists: Alf Clark, Donny Davies, George Follows, Tom Jackson, Archie Ledbrook, Henry Rose, Eric Thompson, and Frank Swift, the former Manchester City and England goalkeeper turned reporter. And then those whose names matter too: Stuart Tom Cable, travel agent Bela Miklos, and Willie Satinoff, a friend of Busby's. And then, the final cruel twist: the co-pilot, Kenneth Raymond, initially survives, but passes away later from his head injuries. In the days afterwards, the survivors find out the list of the lost in the most brutal way imaginable. Names read out like a roll call, each one a door closing. Back in England, there's confusion. Early reports are wrong. Families are told nothing, then something, and then the opposite. Phones don't connect. Newsboys deliver headlines like telegrams. And football people, in that post-war culture of just get on with it, are forced to do the impossible. Organize funerals, console families, and also somehow put a team on the pitch again, because the schedule doesn't stop. And that takes us to the immediate sporting consequences. The part that feels trivial, and yet is essential, because it's how this tragedy becomes part of football history, rather than simply a private catastrophe. United carry on, through Jimmy Murphy, Busby's assistant, the stabilizer. The man who isn't on the plane because he's in Cardiff, managing Wales, in a World Cup qualifying playoff. He returns to Old Trafford, expecting the squad to walk through the door, and instead receives the news that the squad has been torn in half. Within 2 weeks, United play again. They beat Sheffield Wednesday 3-0 in the FA Cup, the first match of the after. The Football Association relaxes rules so United can sign emergency reinforcements. They train away from Manchester because Old Trafford is full of ghosts. And incredibly, they keep winning. They reach the FA Cup final. They reach the European Cup semi-final. But this isn't a fairy tale ending. It's the wounded club trying to stand upright. In the league, the title chase is gone. In Europe, they fall to Milan. In the cup final, they fall to Bolton. But what matters is not the silverware. It's that the club survives at all. And then comes the long road, the part that turns February 6th into something more than a date. Busby returns. Not immediately, not easily, but he returns. And he does the one thing that makes Manchester United's story unique. He rebuilds with the same belief that built the Babes in the first place, that a club is a system, not a set of names. By the mid-1960s, the next generation arrives: Dennis Law, Paddy Crerand, George Best. In 1963, United win the FA Cup. In 65 and 67, they win the league again. And in 68, 10 years after Munich, they win the European Cup. Wembley, extra time, Benfica beaten 4-1. It's the trophy Munich stole from the Babes, delivered to the club that refused to vanish. Now, no Munich story is complete without one more layer: the search for blame. In the aftermath, pilot James Thane is accused of wrongdoing. Legal action drags on for years. But later investigation points to a brutal combination: aircraft design, vulnerabilities, and a runway contaminated by slush, the kind of hazard that, at the time, aviation didn't yet fully understand. That detail matters for a football audience because it underlines the truth of the era. European football was being invented in real time. New competitions, new travel, new risks. And on February 6, 1958, the cost of that risk arrived in the most horrific way. Which brings us to remembrance, because this is not a story that stays in 1958. Every year in Manchester, February 6th is marked: a minute's silence, flowers, the names, the memory that this club, for all its modern global brand power, has an origin story written in grief. And Munich is not alone. Football, tragically, has other crash stories, other national tragedies, other club catastrophes, other generations wiped out in one moment. Superga in 1949, where Torino's great team was lost, or the Zambian national team in the Atlantic Ocean in 1993. And the common thread is always the same. Football feels eternal, until it suddenly doesn't. So what is the legacy of the Busby Babes? It's not just that they were talented, it's that they represented a new idea of what a club could be, youth-driven, future-oriented, European. They were not the end of something, they were the beginning. And Munich is the moment when football learns, in public, that beginnings can be cut off. And yet, also, that clubs can rebuild, that communities can carry memory, that sport can become a form of mourning, and eventually, a form of continuation. Before we close, 3 things to take away from February 6, 1958. First, the European game was built with real risk. We talk about travel like logistics now. In 1958, it was an ordeal, and sometimes a danger. The Champions League is glamorous today, partly because pioneers paid a price we can barely imagine. Second, what survives is the institution and the values. Munich destroyed a team. It didn't destroy the idea, but we built youth, courage, and a belief that the club is bigger than any one lineup. That belief is what allowed United to return. And third, football's greatest myth often begins as grief. Munich isn't a marketing story, it's a wound. And yet it becomes identity, not because anyone wants tragedy, but because remembrance is how communities stay honest about what they are. On this day in 1958, Manchester United's charter flight stopped in Munich to refuel, tried to take off in winter conditions, and crashed on the third attempt, taking 23 lives and breaking the Busby Babes, a catastrophe that reshaped the club, marked the city, and still defines how football remembers its own fragility. We shall never forget them. That's all for episode 98 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. If you have a personal story, a family connection, or a memorial you've attended, a detail that should never be lost, email me at otd@17lostguy.com. Tomorrow, in episode 99, February 7, 1965, Oryx Douala win the first CAF Champions Cup, and African club football crowns a new continent-wide champion. See you then.